Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's another year, another time to make some more money, and I've got the course for you. Start the Conversation, Get the Meeting will help your team, both business development, sales development, get into those new cold accounts, whether that function is under marketing or sales. I'll help you with that by starting organic, natural conversations, not pitching. Have people open up with you, build up a connection with them, understand your total addressable market, prioritize it, and put in a system that scales, that's predictable, that works the way you want it to work instead of the old school pitch. Believe me, I've sat through so many of these cold calling seminars, courses, books, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's evolved. And what I'm doing today is what's working in today's world. It works naturally, and people are just loving it, getting meetings, closing deals, and doing it without the rejection that is typically there in sales. So check it out at b2brevenue.com under the training tab. You can schedule a call with me. We can talk it over. I'll explain how it works and how we can work together on it. You can buy it per student, or I'll customize it for your particular product and team and coach you through that process. Also, if you're a sales leader and you want predictability, you want direction, momentum, and control with your deals, you can sign up for that course as well. Same type of model. A year-long access to it. It's content, community, and coaching, all included at b2brevenue.com. You can get my free ebook there on how companies make product selections. That's all free. Let's get into the interview, but I want to make sure you're checking out my partners. They're in the show notes. This week, it's Pipedrive and Covideo. Pipedrive is the new CRM. It's been out for 5 years. I've been using it forever. I love that. It's connected up with your email, your calendar, and now they have team capabilities. Covideo is the video email system. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's the way to break into new accounts. It's so much more engaging than text. Check them out. Also, make sure you're checking me out on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end. Hey, Brett, thanks for joining us today as a way of getting started. Tell us about yourself.
Hey, thanks, Brian. It's a real pleasure to be on the show today. And Brett Trainer, I am a principal in a management consulting firm called Point B. And my primary focus with them is working with what I would call legacy B2B companies and helping them modernize their go-to-market strategy and execution.
And how do they typically engage with you? Do you guys cold outreach to them, or do they find out about you through references? Or
I think it's a combination of both. We have a pretty good network where we're connected, and a lot of the companies I'm working with today have worked with Point B in the past. I joined them just over 2 years ago, and really the primary focus was on helping these companies, grow. Typical, I don't know, I'm sure you're seeing this as well. And when I say legacy B2B, it's really the companies that were founded pre-mainstream internet, 2009, 2010, where, SaaS companies in the last 6 to 8 years really leveraged the power of the internet. A lot of these legacy companies were built and not structured really to excel, in the current environment. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was really just going to ask you, what do you typically see when you go in?
Yeah, a lot of the leading indicator is revenues have flatlined, right? We've been enjoying year-over-year growth for 10 to 12 years, but all of a sudden we're either flat or regressing a little bit. And typically what we're finding is, that's where the conversation starts. And then we can work back and say what's changed within the business. And a lot of the time, we're doing the exact same things we were doing 2 or 3 years ago. And really what's at the core of that, I think, is, the changing consumer, the buyers, the way you want to do business with companies is changing. And if the companies aren't adapting to that change, they're gonna see that decrease in revenue.
And how do you start that conversation with them? They have to be in pain? Is that
yes
the first ingredient?
I think that's exactly right. And, there's no bigger pain to a lot of the companies I work with are more the mid-market. So the $1 billion annual revenue. And, when you start flatlining revenue, either public company or private, that's a big pain point, right? That's going to raise a lot of red flags. And typically the first reaction is we need to, optimize our sales organization. And what I like to do is kind of take that step back and say it's really probably deeper than just sales. It's probably the entire your go-to-market. And when I say go-to-market, you're right, your demand generation to your sales organization to your onboarding to customer success, and kind of work backwards from there. So really starting with the customer.
Yeah. And is that a painful process or?
I think if the longer they've been in business, the tougher the change is going to be, right? So one of the companies we worked with was a 100-year-old distribution company, and they've been doing the things the same way for 50 years, and they took the right steps, right? I think people think, what we need to do is we need to take advantage of digital, right, and data and machine learning. But really, I think the first step is looking at your process. And even 3 years ago, I think a lot of my first steps would have been, let's look at the sales process. Are we, back, 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the rise of inside sales? Are we leveraging the efficiencies of inside sales? And now I've started to turn the conversation around. We talk about the customer, who their customers are, and really trying to dig into what their pain points are versus, how do we shift our, the sales organization? Do I need to add inside sales? You may gain some efficiencies, but it's really, let's start back at the customer. Who's actually buying from you? And then how do they want to buy from you? I think you had a guest on, probably interviewed her a couple weeks ago, but Kristen was talking about kind of the same thing I'm seeing, but on a smaller scale, right? We're not growing anymore. We're the traditional company. So I think that's always the first step is let's align around your customer if they even really know who their customers are.
And do you think they've just gotten comfortable maybe with their install base and they're not going after new opportunities or?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think, I worked for a chief revenue officer at 4 different companies, the same guy. And he always had a saying about, the 3 levers of growth are, acquisition, retention, and expansion. And a lot of companies will have strategies for 1 or 2, but probably not all 3. And I think where I'm seeing the biggest pain point is in the acquisition stage, right? How do we get new customers into the door? But I do believe that, within the sales process, we're seeing more companies take greater steps to make sure that transition from, the demand change, the first engagement through the sales process through onboarding is more frictionless than maybe it has been in the past. Because I kind of grew up on the corporate side before moving to the consulting side. And even when we knew we had hiccups within that, call it a handshake, right, before the 4 different groups as you progress through the sales cycle, customers' expectations or buyers' expectations are shifting. If you're in an industry where somebody hasn't streamline that process, then you've got a chance for a first mover. But if you've got a competitor that's already taken that step to improve that process, then you're already a step behind.
And that's it. Now, are a lot of these clients having been disrupted by, a smaller, newcomer?
I think it's more the fear of being disrupted by a newcomer, and they're taking the steps, but where I think that the opportunity is they're doing it department by department versus taking that more holistic look that said, all right, if this is the way the customer's going to buy from us, right, they're going to engage on our website, they're going to do their research, they're going to look for references, and then start to engage with our sales rep and map that process out, right? So here's all the things the customer wants, here's their expectations, you go through it, and then look at all the activities you have to do on your side as a company, and then look to see who should be actually doing those activities, if that makes sense, versus saying, well, it's now a marketing qualified lead, it's going to go to the sales, right? So if you flip the switch and look at it from a customer perspective and then apply resources where that makes the most sense, I would think, and I have seen a lot of these organizations are, allocating the resources in the wrong areas. And so to take us, the challenge also for some of these companies is, they're very siloed. They have their own operating budgets, they have their own goals, and they're not necessarily shared goals. So in order to really drive change in a lot of these organizations, it's almost up at the CEO level that's driving it.
That's what I was going to ask, because I mean, that is something that a sales leader has influence over, but not control.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And marketing, right? Because if we've been talking about for 20 years, the alignment between sales and marketing. And there was some Miller-Heiman research that just came out less than, I don't know, I think I saw it about a month ago, that only 30% of today, I think they surveyed 900 B2B organizations, and less than 30% actually can define what a lead is between sales and marketing. I've been having this discussion for 20 years.
I think it's getting worse, not better.
You're right.
I hear CMOs talk about it, and then they get all up in arms about how many times it's followed up on, and it's like, oh, everyone's getting into everybody else's sandbox, but nothing's really moving forward. Exactly,
and unless the CEO gets involved with that, or we go back to I think you've been in this space long enough to remember when the chief revenue officer actually was responsible for both sales and marketing, right? Yeah. So you can deploy the resources. So we're seeing a little of that. Frankly, I'm surprised we're not seeing more of it, just because of it's really hard I think you can separate the marketing aspect, maybe the branding and Marcom.
Yes.
But when you get to the demand generation, that's got to be hand in hand with the sales organization.
That's it. When somebody hits the website and marketing says, well, it's not ready for sales. Well, that's not your decision.
Right.
If they want to buy or they're in market, they're ready for sales. Let the salesperson decide. Or if salesperson, qualifies it or disqualifies it, and you didn't touch it 11 times because we read it takes 11 times to.
Right.
That's not everybody.
No, exactly. And I think if you look at it from that customer, right, there's, the way I like to super simple think about this is, from the company standpoint, everybody should be able to tell the same story. What is the problem you're solving for the customer? How do you solve it? And how do you solve it differently than your competitors, and be able to do that online, offline through the process? I think there's two types of, or maybe there's probably more than that, but three types of customers. The one that know they have a problem and they know you, right? So those are your optimal customers, but there's the customers that know they have a problem but don't know you. Again, those are good targets. But then there's the third one where I think a lot of companies spend time is they don't know that they have a problem, they don't know you, but yet you're wasting a lot of time on those channels. So I think, to your point, the sooner we get back to, even if it's an aligned goal, right? So take attribution out of marketing, because, we influence these 12 leads or 1,200 leads, whatever the number is, and say, how many new customers did we generate together? I just don't, the old thinking of separate departments just doesn't work anymore.
And how about as far as like the friction in getting a transaction done? I was at a startup that got acquired by a huge company, and we were doing mostly new accounts. And we got to the point where they could not buy it from this company. We had to go through a VAR or a reseller, just because the paperwork and the processing had become so arduous. And what we call the sales prevention team would always win.
Yeah, I mean, back in, I joke about the old days. I've been in this space for over 20 years now. You can get away with that type of thing, right? Because they had to buy the way you were selling. And I think if you don't take that friction out of your process and make it easier, people want to give you money. Don't make it hard,
yes.
Right? Which just still to this day amazes me how hard we can make it sometimes. But yeah, I think that's where the moves are, especially in B2B. I think people talk, well, it's now B2C. I'm like, we've come quite that far, but I think the expectations as the buyers get younger, right, and more used to the B2C experience with online and everything else, it's driving towards that. And I don't remember what podcast I was listening to, but one of the guests was talking about, especially in the B2B, if you've got delays, waits, you're making the customer wait, or queues, that's going to be ripe for disruption. So you're not thinking of the competitor today, somebody out there who's She's going to be coming at you. I'm so sorry.
Is that one of your clients?
Yeah. She's 14 and she almost always is asleep for 8 hours of the day I'm in the office, and today she picks the day to see somebody at the door.
Yeah. He's looking for his deliverable.
Oh my god! Yeah, exactly. Outbound sales, right? Buy from me.
And I got to believe, the bigger the company, the more friction there typically is.
Yeah, exactly. And the more siloed they are because they've got different operating budgets and different goal. I mean, honestly, I still think the biggest thing is they're not looking at the outcome. They're looking at the tasks they have to do at each of those groups. So, but if they don't, it's kind of evolve or die type of an approach. I know it's kind of drastic, but I think if you're not moving in that direction, somebody's going to come up and start to steal your customers. And I think that's what we're seeing today.
And that constantly happens because, I grew up in the software space, and as soon as the open source vendors started to come out, people weren't getting open source because it was better. They were getting it because there was no friction. Right. And I think that's what created, and I have this argument with a lot of people about like Salesforce. It wasn't that the product was necessarily better, but they circumvented having to deal with IT.
Exactly. No, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And I would say most of my career spent more on the traditional legacy side, but I spent about 18 months in the SaaS space 2.5, 3 years ago. Really opened my eyes to where these business models were going. Again, you're right. It was all about the experience and making it easy and taking IT out of the conversation, which is, I still think is a challenge that people are still working around today.
Yeah. And you see it with other companies where you get the freemium. All of a sudden, you get a bunch of people using it, and they get used to it, and moving up becomes really easy. Companies like, Box, and and you see it in expense reporting, and it's kind of a Trojan horse strategy, but it works.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I'll never forget my first introduction to a SaaS company. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was talking to it was a Chicago-based company, and he was thinking about starting a sales organization. I'm like, all right, so you're just a real startup to get him. He's like, no, 100% of my business is becoming inbound, but I think we can expand it if we go outbound. And that was a foreign concept to me at the time, but that's I think the way that the future is going, or it's in here in some aspects.
Have you had any success when the CEO wasn't bought in?
We can have limited success where we can improve, department by department, so they'll get better, right? So take some friction out of the sales process. I still spend, a good deal of time just, a CRM implementation, or if we do that, let's, look at the process again. So try to but you use that old saying, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Yeah. So unless you get either the C-suite bought in that, you've got to look and evolve, or, they'll continue to be opportunistic and make, tweaks, but it's not going to it's not going to keep them in the game, or it's going to continue to hinder, revenue growth. And, along those lines, I think the other area, and I'm by no means an expert in machine learning, but the opportunity with process and data to take, inefficiencies out of businesses are, I think, the next big opportunity that they have. But again, that goes back to getting organized around the customer and having good data. But just the opportunities for these legacy companies are there. It's just no way around it. It's going to be painful.
And let's say they are bought in. How long does it typically take? Have you been able to have like a home run?
We're still in process. A couple of companies.
Maybe a triple.
We're 2 years into it, but started it with another company who's super bought in and really aggressive about this transformation that they want to go through. So, I think we're biting it off in 3-month increments. But, if we can get something completely transformed, it's probably going to be at least 6 to 8 months because of if you start digging into the sales orgs with compensation plans and other areas, you just can't flip those necessarily in the middle of the year. So they're on an aggressive plan that we're targeting 6 months. So I'll circle back with you after we're done and let you know if it was if we were successful.
What was, you don't have to give the name of the company, but like to say the largest.
Yeah, this is they're right around that $1 million. That seems to be the sweet spot where they've recognized that, or $1 billion. Sorry, not $1 million. $1 billion in annual revenue are the ones that are recognizing that they've got the opportunities and are moving towards at different paces to address the issue.
And do you look for quick fixes, or are you looking for the end solution?
Yeah, I think we've got the end in mind, but always looking for the low-hanging fruit, right? There's certain things that we can clean up and improve today, as simple as, it's going to take us 2 days to do it, but we're going to define what a lead is between sales and marketing. and I'm trying to think back in my career, the number of times I've facilitated those meetings, I think the quickest we've ever been able to do it is 2 solid days. Wow. And that's with both sales and marketing really wanting to get this accomplished. So, and I think that's one of the big ones, because if they can't do that, you're just leaving revenue on the table. But secondarily, are there some quick fixes into the process that we can look at to help take some of that friction out, even if it's not a wholesale change yet? But I'd say 9 times out of 10, it is between the process of sales and marketing, and a little bit within, the customer success or customer service. Do they have a plan in place to make sure the churn rates, not increasing as you're going through the, trying to bring in new customers?
And I bet that part, that pricing going from, enterprise one time on-prem to SaaS monthly or annually, that must be a painful transition.
Yeah, you summed it up pretty well. It is because it's just a complete change of the way they've been doing business. Yeah. But I do see more of a convergence and more of an emphasis on the customer service. If you look, typical organization, sales is, hey, we're bringing all this new revenue, throw it over the fence, right? I'm going after the next customer. And without one of the last corporate jobs I had, I knew this going in. We had, pretty good relationship with marketing. We had everything defined. Sales was good. And then when it went to onboarding and then customer success, it was actually in the operations group. Oh. And not that they didn't want to do a good job, but it was going back to that, AR&E strategy. Are they all tied? So you're not just, bleeding revenue on the churn side and leaving money on the table with the marketing side. The other area that I see a lot of time is really working with defining roles, right? So you work with a company like, oh, we've got 50 outside sales reps. Well, we interview them. They're actually really just account managers, because they may have some incentive for getting new business, but at the end of the day, they're getting paid to make sure they retain their customers. Right. So, as a quick hit, one of the things I always look at is, what are you comping people on? If it's not dedicated to keeping customers or expanding the base, and they're also tasked with keeping the customers, you're never going to get those reps optimized. Yeah, because if the compensation isn't right, it's like getting a new customer is 10 times harder. The volume's so much smaller. The legal is, harder. Yeah. So the 5X work effort, if not more, to get a new customer in, where I'm still getting paid the same if renewals. I just can keep my current. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, where have you seen the right place to put customer success?
I still
operations isn't the right place.
No, I think we're seeing, or at least I'm seeing, more of a dedicated customer success team, right? That it is tied back to very specific goals and metrics of churn, right? So you can tier it depending on how big the customers are, and with the SaaS company, if somebody's spending $29 a month with you, may not be the right place to have a dedicated support person. But if you looked at a tiered process, right, for strategic accounts, mid-size and then small, and assigning groups that are accountable for those, is where I'm actually seeing a lot of effort going to those those type of areas, and it's working. Where historically it was back to the sales rep when there was an issue with the problem. So I think that area is improving, but the one that's not is still the sales, direct sales or new logos versus keeping the book of business.
And so customer success would report to the CEO, not to sales, not to marketing, not to...
My recommendation, over the years, I was thinking there's probably maybe marketing, sales, then customer success, but I think there's a demand gen aspect of it that's separate than marketing that may sit in between sales and marketing. But I think overall, if it was my company, let's put it this way, I'd make one chief revenue officer responsible for all of those levers, right? Yeah. So customer success, sales, and the demand gen aspect of it, because that way you've got a budget, you've got one goal, and you can pull the different levers in order to get, to that revenue target. And
you don't get the finger pointing at the end of the quarter.
Exactly, and I have seen. One of the customers I worked with, they did bring in, interestingly enough, a B2C marketing executive to head up sales and marketing. So they took more of a demand gen focus, and then how do we leverage sales to execute right against those strategies, and then customer success. So I do think companies are starting to see that, that kind of the shift in, especially if we have to grow business, right? It's going to take a different approach. And it can't, get bottled up to the CEO level if you want to maximize what you're doing on your spend.
Yeah. How about as far as infrastructure? Are you shocked at how ancient it is when you go in?
Yes. And again, I think it goes back to this is just the way we've always done it. And if you haven't had turnover within the sales org and you got the same leader that's been there, 6-7 years, and a lot's changed in the last few years with, opportunities to increase those efficiencies. But yeah, just the number of, let me take a step back. So I think companies went through a wave where they were throwing technologies at the problems, right? With the sales stack or tech stack and marketing, everything you could do. Hey, buy this technology, it's going to solve your problems. And I think they're realizing that's just more expense. And, in some cases, if the process is broken, they're failing quicker and more expensive. So, again, that's where I really strongly advise companies to take that step back and look at process first before any technology investments, people investments, just to make sure you're automating the right processes.
Yeah, because all of a sudden that becomes the target instead of the revenue growth number. We got to get it into marketing automation or into CRM or ERP or whatever. And then they hire a contractor to do that, and it turns into an 18-month project.
Right. And then they have to go back and undo it. I mean, one of the companies I'm working with actually did it the right way. So they came back in, IT asked us, or actually brought me in to say, hey, we're going to go through this digital transformation, but we want to make sure that sales and the businesses have their processes in order. So we don't want to invest, multi-million dollars and do things the way we've been doing. So we actually took them a step back and re-engineered all of their processes, documented them, and then captured kind of the business requirements and the technical requirements from that. Had they not taken that step back, they would have just tried to automate current process, and they wouldn't have got their ROI coming out of that.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, this has been a great conversation, Brett. Where do people go to connect with you and learn more about your company?
Hey, thanks. The best bet is probably LinkedIn. It's Brett, B-R-E-T-T, Trainor, T-R-A-I-N-O-R. Always happy to connect with folks interested in this space and have a conversation. I really appreciate you having me on today, Brian.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. Hey, make sure you check us out on LinkedIn. And B2B Revenue is the website. You get the free ebook there. You can learn about the courses. You can also check out my YouTube channel, Brian Burns Sales Podcast on YouTube, where I store both these podcasts, my videos that I do daily on sales and marketing tips, all the webinars are hosted there. So if you ever get lost and you don't know where to go, Brian Burns Sales Podcast on YouTube is a great place to be. And you can sign up to get on my calendar at B2B Revenue under training, and we can talk over your sales and marketing situations about getting you into your dream accounts in a fast, natural, organic way. And if you happen to see my content fly by on LinkedIn, I'd really appreciate a like or comment or a share, and we'll see you next time.